Have you ever spent years showing up for someone, only to realize you were never meant to be counted? That's what this story is about. A man who believed love was proven quietly, over time, and one moment that forced him to understand. He'd been standing in the wrong place all along. This isn't a story about shouting or confrontation. It's about loyalty, silence, and the moment absence becomes a choice. If stories about family, dignity, and quiet turning points matter to you, consider subscribing. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I never thought I'd be told where I didn't belong. Especially not by someone I'd helped raise. The conversation didn't start cruelly. That's the part that still surprises me. It happened in the kitchen. On a quiet afternoon. Sunlight caught dust in the air. Wedding plans were spread across the table. Venues. Menus. Guest lists. I stood at the sink, rinsing a mug. Listening. She cleared her throat. I wanted to talk to you about the ceremony. I nodded. Okay. She didn't look at me. It's important to me that it feels authentic. I waited. Years of small pauses had trained me to. There will be a lot of people there who've known me my whole life. My real family. The word real landed softly. And stayed. She continued carefully. I was thinking maybe it would be better if you helped in other ways. Financially. Behind the scenes. I turned off the tap. Behind the scenes. She finally looked at me. I don't mean anything bad by it. I just don't want awkward questions. You know how people are. I did. I'd been managing people for years. I can still come. Right? I asked. She hesitated. That hesitation answered everything. I think it would be simpler if you didn't. But of course. Your support means a lot. Support. Not presence. Not belonging. I glanced down the hallway. Her mother stood there, pretending to read something on her phone. She didn't look up. She didn't intervene. Silence can be agreement. When it's convenient. I nodded. If that's what you want. Relief crossed her face. Not guilt. Relief. Later that night, I asked my wife about it. She didn't mean it that way, she said, folding laundry without looking at me. Weddings are stressful. Did you know? I asked. She paused. I assume. That was it. No defense. No correction. Just assumption. That night, I lay awake thinking about the years. School pickups. College applications. Repairs. Advice given quietly. Support without conditions. And now, a role had finally been assigned to me. Useful. Invisible. Optional. The next morning, I made a decision. Not the one they expected. I didn't argue. I didn't demand explanations. I didn't ask for reassurance. I agreed. Because agreement can be more final than anger. And once you accept where someone places you, you're free to decide where you will no longer stand. Sometimes exclusion doesn't shout. It simply assumes you'll stay. Have you ever noticed that answers don't always come in words? Sometimes they arrive as pauses, as glances that never quite meet yours, as decisions already made, without you in the room. After that conversation, nothing changed on the surface. And that's how I knew everything had. Dinner happened at the usual time. The television murmured in the background. My wife asked if I wanted tea. Ordinary gestures. Carefully preserved. But something essential had shifted. Like a chair quietly removed from the table. I didn't bring up the wedding again that night. I wanted to see what would happen if I stayed quiet. The next day, the messages started. My stepdaughter sent links to caterers and florists, thanking me for helping make this possible. No mention of seating. No mention of the ceremony. Just invoices and deadlines. I replied with a simple, okay. Each response seemed to ease her. She grew lighter, more confident, as if a complication had been resolved. By the end of the week, my wife began talking about the wedding, in the third person. They're thinking of doing a smaller ceremony. They decided on the outdoor venue. They don't want distractions. I waited for her to say, we. She never did. One evening, I asked a question I already knew the answer to. So, I'm not going. She didn't look up from the calendar. It's probably for the best, she said gently. You know how sensitive things are right now. Sensitive to what? The truth hovered between us. Unspoken, but fully formed. I wasn't being excluded because of logistics. I was being excluded because my presence challenged the story they wanted to tell. And stories are easier to manage when inconvenient characters are removed. I nodded. All right. That word, all right, felt like a door closing behind me. From that moment on, the house felt different. Conversations grew shorter. Plans happened elsewhere. I noticed how often I was left out of decisions that involved money. I was still expected to provide. And I noticed something else. No one asked how I felt. Not once. Weeks passed. Deposits were paid. Dresses were fitted. Invitations mailed. To people who'd never known me. And wouldn't miss me. I moved through it all quietly. Like furniture no one thinks to move. But inside, something was forming. Not anger. Not resentment. Clarity. I finally saw the pattern. I hadn't been valued for who I was. I'd been valued for what I supplied. My role had never been father. It had been support structure. And support structures aren't invited to celebrations. They're expected to hold everything up and stay out of sight. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house hummed softly. I thought about the word family. How easily it's used. And how carefully it's withdrawn. That's when I understood something important. Asking to be included would only confirm the position they'd already assigned me. So I stopped asking. Instead, I started planning. Not a confrontation. Not a speech. A separation so quiet it wouldn't be noticed. Until it was complete. Because when people decide you don't belong, they rarely expect you to agree. And then act accordingly. And that's when silence becomes something else entirely. It becomes an answer. Have you ever realized that the most permanent decisions are often made in complete silence? That's how this one began. I didn't announce anything. I didn't change my routine. I still left for work at the same time. Came home at the same hour. Sat at the same kitchen table. On the outside, nothing shifted. On the inside, everything did. The first call I made was to a lawyer. Not the kind you see on billboards. Someone recommended by a coworker who'd gone through a quiet divorce years earlier. We spoke for 20 minutes. He asked careful questions. I answered honestly. What are you hoping to do? He asked. I want things clean, I said. No drama. He paused. Then we moved slowly. That suited me. The second call was to a financial advisor. Someone I'd met once at a retirement seminar and never followed up with. I told him I wanted clarity. Just that word. Clarity. He reviewed documents I hadn't looked at closely in years. Some accounts were fine. Others needed separating. Nothing alarming. Nothing emotional. Just steps. The third call was harder. A real estate agent. I didn't tell my wife. Not because I wanted to surprise her, but because I wanted to understand my options before anyone could frame them for me. The house was in both our names, but the down payment had come from an inheritance I rarely talked about. It gives you leverage, the agent said carefully. If you choose to use it. Leverage. Another word that sounds harsh. Until you realize. It simply means choice. I hung up. And sat for a long time. Staring at the wall. I thought about all the years I'd avoided that word. How often I'd stepped back. So others could feel comfortable. How I'd mistaken restraint for peace. That evening, my stepdaughter stopped by. With fabric samples. And seating charts. She spoke quickly. Excitedly. As if momentum itself might keep uncomfortable truths from surfacing. We'll need the final payment soon, she said, smiling. But there's no rush. You've been amazing through all of this. Amazing. Still not invited. I nodded. Just let me know. She left. Without noticing the quiet shift in the room. Over the next week, I gathered paperwork. In small increments. Old files. Statements. Deeds. I kept them in a plain folder. At the bottom of my work bag. No dramatic gestures. No late-night meetings. Just preparation. My wife noticed eventually. She always did. You seem distant, she said one night. Not unkindly. I'm just tired, I replied. She accepted that easily. She always had. That's when I understood something important. People who benefit from your silence rarely question it. 2 weeks later, the real estate agent called back. We can list quietly, she said. No sign at first. Do it, I replied. When I hung up, I felt something unexpected. Not fear. Not guilt. Relief. Because for the first time, since that kitchen conversation, I wasn't reacting. I was acting. I wasn't trying to be seen. I wasn't trying to be understood. I was arranging my life in a way that no longer required permission. And the strange thing about quiet decisions is this: by the time anyone else realizes what you've done, you've already finished doing it. Silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. The sign went up on a Tuesday. No warning. No discussion. Just a clean white post. At the edge of the lawn. Standing there. Like it had always belonged. I wasn't home when my wife saw it. She called me at work. Her voice sharp and controlled. In a way I recognized immediately. The tone she used when something important had slipped beyond her grip. What is that? She asked. A sign, I said. Don't do this, she replied. Not now. Now is exactly when, I said. Then I ended the call. Before she could reframe the conversation. When I came home that evening, she was pacing the living room. The wedding binder lay open on the table. Abandoned. Her composure cracked. The moment she saw me. You listed the house? She said. Without telling me? I set my keys down calmly. I thought we were simplifying things. She stared at me. This isn't about simplification, she said. This is about control. I nodded. Yes. It is. That stopped her. She tried again. Softer this time. You're overreacting. This wedding is just temporary stress. No, I said. This is clarity. The word landed differently this time. She followed me into the kitchen, lowering her voice, as if the walls might listen. You're punishing her, she said. She didn't mean it the way you took it. I took it exactly the way it was offered, I replied. My stepdaughter arrived later that night. She must have driven past the sign. What's going on? She demanded. Why is the house for sale? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't sit down. You told me I didn't belong, I said. I listened. Her face flushed. That's not what I said. It is, I replied. You just used nicer words. She crossed her arms. So you're doing this to get back at me? No, I said. I'm doing this to step away. Her mother stepped in quickly. We can talk about this after the wedding. That's when I finally shook my head. There is no after, I said. You made that clear. Silence filled the room. Thick. Uncomfortable. My stepdaughter spoke again. Her voice unsteady. So what? You're just disappearing? I thought about it. Yes, I said. That's what disappear means. Her expression shifted. Anger giving way to panic. What about the payments? The deposits? I met her eyes. I won't fund something. I'm not allowed to attend. The words weren't sharp. They were final. She looked to her mother. My wife opened her mouth. Then closed it again. For the first time. She didn't know which side of the room she stood on. That night, I packed a bag. Not everything. Just enough. Clothes. Tools. Personal papers. The plain folder from my work bag. I left the rest. Exactly where it was. At the door. My wife said quietly. You don't have to do this. I turned back. I already did. I moved into a small furnished place. Across town. Nothing special. Quiet. Clean. Mine. A week later. I heard the wedding plans were on hold. Another week. And the phone calls started. Careful ones. Apologies that tested the water. Without stepping in. I didn't answer. Because disappearing wasn't a threat. It wasn't revenge. It was alignment. For the first time, my actions matched the way I'd been treated. And once that happens, there's no going back to standing quietly in the wrong place. I left one thing behind on purpose. Not furniture. Not money. Not anything that could be mistaken for leverage. I left the binder. It sat on the kitchen table, where we planned holidays, paid bills, and pretended difficult conversations didn't exist. A plain black binder. No label on the spine. Easy to overlook. If you weren't looking for it. Inside wasn't drama. No accusations. No demands. Just records. I imagine they found it the day after I moved out. My wife would have noticed first. She always liked order. I can see her opening it, expecting paperwork she already knew, and realizing she didn't. There were bank statements, clearly separated, property records, a timeline of what I'd contributed over the years. Not just financially, but practically. Repairs, improvements, debts covered quietly. When things ran short. Nothing exaggerated. Nothing emotional. Just facts. In the front pocket. There was a single letter. Not long. Not angry. It said, I was told I didn't belong. I listened. This binder explains what disappears when I do. That was it. No signature. No closing. I didn't stay to see their reaction. But I heard about it later. My stepdaughter called first. Left a voicemail. Her voice sounded different. Tight. Uncertain. We need to talk, she said. I didn't realize. She didn't finish the sentence. My wife called the next evening. Not angry. Careful. You could have said something. She told me. I did, I replied. You just didn't hear it. Silence stretched between us. The wedding deposits, she said finally. We can't cover them alone. I know, I said. And the house, she added. This is moving fast. Yes, she sighed. The sound of someone realizing control had slipped too far to retrieve. Apologies started arriving after that. Not all at once. Carefully timed. Messages that began with, I didn't mean it that way. We were under a lot of stress. I read them. I didn't reply. Because apologies offered only after consequences aren't about understanding, they're about loss. A few weeks later, the wedding was officially cancelled. Not postponed. Cancelled. The story shifted quietly. Something about timing, priorities, finances. No one mentioned me. And that was fine. I met with my lawyer again. The process moved forward cleanly. Assets divided. Agreements honored. No shouting. No courtroom drama. Just signatures. And closure. The house sold faster than expected. On the day I handed over the keys, I stood in the empty living room for a moment. Sunlight came through the same window it always had, landing on the floor, where our lives had once overlapped. I didn't feel bitter. I felt finished. That evening, I sat alone in my new place. A smaller space, with fewer echoes. I made dinner, ate without rushing. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for permission to relax. I thought about that word again. Family. How easily it's defined. When it costs nothing. How quickly it changes. When boundaries appear. The binder wasn't punishment. It was explanation. And explanations, once given, don't need to be repeated. Sometimes the quietest evidence speaks the loudest. Disappearing isn't dramatic when it's done right. It doesn't come with slammed doors or raised voices. It arrives quietly, like a decision that no longer needs defending. The divorce finalized without argument. Papers signed. Accounts separated. Titles transferred. Clean lines drawn where assumptions used to be. What I recovered wasn't a victory. It was accuracy. The kind that lets you sleep without replaying conversations in your head. I moved farther away than I expected. Not to escape anyone. Just to breathe in a place where my presence didn't require explanation. A small rental near a park. Morning light through the windows. Coffee on a counter that stayed uncluttered. My name on the mailbox. I volunteered twice a week at a community workshop. Fixing things people thought were beyond repair. Toasters. Lamps. Old radios. There's a quiet satisfaction in restoring function without fanfare. You tighten what's loose. You replace what's worn. You test. You move on. News traveled back to me in fragments. It always does. The wedding didn't happen. The venue refunded part of the deposit. Friends chose sides quietly. If at all. My stepdaughter reached out months later. A short message. Careful words. She said she understood now. That she'd been overwhelmed. That she hoped someday we could talk. I read it twice. Understanding that arrives after loss isn't nothing. But it isn't a bridge either. I wished her well. And I didn't reopen the door. Boundaries only work when you keep them. My ex-wife reached out too. Longer. Softer. She wrote about regret. About how fast everything moved. About how she hadn't realized how much I carried. I believed her. And I also knew belief doesn't require reunion. We had already said what needed saying. One fall afternoon, I sat on a park bench watching leaves turn. And thought about how easily dignity slips away. When you're busy being helpful. How standing back can feel like kindness. Until it becomes habit. How silence, practiced long enough, starts to sound like agreement. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns hot and fast. This felt steadier. Like standing on solid ground after years of balancing. At this age, you don't rebuild to impress anyone. You rebuild to fit yourself. I kept my routine simple. I spent money where it mattered. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. And here's what I learned. Late. But not too late. When someone tells you where you don't belong, believe them. Then decide where you do. Disappearing wasn't punishment. It wasn't a lesson for anyone else. It was permission. For me. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been useful instead of valued, present but unseen, you're not alone. quiet strength counts. Boundaries matter. And it's never too late to choose a place that fits. If you want more stories like this, honest, measured, rooted in real life, subscribe to the channel. More are coming. And each one carries something worth keeping.